Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about The Boys Season 4 Episode 2. It's called Life Among the Septics. So spoilers for the episode. And I'll never look at the human centipede the same way again. Which is alluding to the... I feel like every episode of The Boys has to have like the one crazy moment. Sometimes there'll be more than one, but typically there's one crazy visual or gross or super sexual moment that we can, and arguably there's a lot of cock later on in this episode, so I guess technically it's not the one crazy moment in this one, but honestly a bunch of guys standing naked isn't as standout as the human centipede masturbation visual that we were greeted with a little bit earlier on in the episode. But I'll get to all that. This continues, obviously all the character stories from the first episode. Truth Con's the big sort of main thing that the episode revolves around. But obviously, as usual with the show, there's a lot of advancements for all the characters. And yeah, the only one that I'm not super into yet, again, is probably Huey. The whole thing with his mum being back and him being mad at her for leaving when he was 6. So far, I don't feel all that much for it. I'm sure it will turn out, and I'm sure thematically it's relevant to other things. Hell, even in this episode, Huey kind of shows A-Train some sympathy because he's going through family stuff, and like I figure that is going to ultimately be a hint or a tether to how he's eventually going to forgive his mother, or how he'll eventually come to some kind of whatever. Like, it's showing you that he still has a heart, but when it comes to his mother, he's blinded by the resentment that he's felt ever since he was a kid, and we hear him act out. But to be honest, these scenes by far are my least favorite moments in the episode. They're not necessarily bad, they're just not as exciting or as fun as anything else. And when I say exciting, I don't mean I need like an action. Like, some of my favorite moments in this episode are just little one-line things. There's a few lines at the TruthCon which had me cackling with laughter because of how low-key they were. Although the funniest moment of the episode wasn't even at TruthCon. I'll be talking about a certain little girl thanking someone for saving her, which broke me just because of the way it was said. But just to dive into what was going on here then, so who do we start with? I've already done Huey, basically. I don't really have anything else to say. He's like, I'll challenge you for power of attorney. Turns out his mum and dad had been speaking off and on for the last couple of years. That was a bit of a bombshell for him. There, I've covered it. I don't have much else to say about it. Let's talk about Homelander and Ryan for a bit, shall we? Because we see in this episode that Ryan is given a pitch. He's given a pitch for what his costume's going to be, that he's going to be like Homelander Boy or whatever they're going to end up calling him. But he's got like a sort of child's version of the Homelander outfit. Homelander's super excited. But of course, Sage is very vocal and says, this is bullshit, this is awful, and here's why. And it says some things that Homelander clearly doesn't like. And I do wonder if the whole ego thing that was brought up last episode is going to become a problem much quicker than even Sage thought it might. Although I've got some thoughts on like what might be going on with Sage in this episode. That I'll get to in a second. But there's a couple things I loved about this scene. I loved the look on Ashley's face when Sage started back talking to Homelander and was being very short with him and was like, no, this is dumb, this blows, this is what you should do. You asked me for this advice, I'm giving it to you. And she's very, very aggressive with Homelander. And the way Ashley's sitting there with her mouth agape, just like almost being mad on Homelander's behalf. It's not even like she's scared necessarily, because I feel like the way that I would have thought this would have played out is that Ashley would look scared because she's worried that Homelander will get so angry that he'll just kill them all because he can do that, right? Typically, the way she acts around him comes from this place of fear, but it's almost like it crossed over from fear of what Homelander might do to, wait a minute, I'm not allowed to get away with that. So I'm now mad that you're getting away with this, potentially, right? It felt like it was coming from more that place than it was about concern at a certain point. And even, I think when they get in the elevator afterwards and Ashley says, hey, a bit of advice, girl to girl, he can't speak to Homelander like that. It really came off more as, I'm not concerned about you, but I can't get away with that, so I'm making it clear you're not allowed to get away with that either. But of course, that's not how Sage reacts to any of this. She says, no, Homelander wanted me here. I'm here to give advice. Now, of course, Homelander doesn't actually take her advice here. She's very clear that Homelander should not be present for Ryan's first big superhero moment, right? They're actually arranging a fake incident, a save, where he can save someone. It can be his big grand debut to the public, but it's not real. It's stunt people and whatever else. But Sage says Homelander shouldn't be there because if he's truly the chosen one, if he's truly special, then he has to stand alone. Sidekicks aren't cool. But movies have trained us to, like the lone white savior, which is your Luke Skywalker, your Harry Potter, so on and so on. She gives a few examples. And Homelander hates this advice. You can see it in his face. He gives in front of everyone, but then later on, of course, he just shows up at the scene anyway. So I wonder if Sage will have some fallout with this next episode where she'll actually confront him about it. I'd be very curious to see that if she does. What I'm fascinated by, though, with this Sage stuff, and I realized I said I was going to talk about Homelander and Ryan. I'll get to the actual scene with the save and whatnot in a bit, but the thing that stuck out to me about Sage in this episode is that, particularly in the elevator with Ashley and then the Deep, right, especially the part with the Deep after Ashley leaves the elevator, it really felt like she's playing them, like she's manipulating them, and she is provoking them into certain confrontations and certain reactions, right? Turning to Ashley and saying, hey, you might want to make yourself useful. You should probably start lactating so that Homelander can use you for milk the same way that he used Stillwell. That wasn't the exact line. It was a bit more, the word titties definitely came into it, but that was a funny moment. And then, the Deep comes in and says, hey, what if I was in the save with Ryan? That'd be good, right? And Ashley's like, you idiot, you're on PETA's bestiality watch list, and you want us to put you in a PG friendly, family friendly superhero scene? Not a chance. She says something to the effect of, oh, dumb people who think they're smart make me want to eat my own shit, right? That was the line she says. Which is a funny line, and I feel like most people have dealt with someone who's stupid in their lives who gets them frustrated because you just can't have a conversation with them. So on some level, I understand where Ashley's coming from. But as soon as she leaves the elevator, Sage turns to the Deep and says, "Why do you let her talk to you like that? You're the pinnacle of the species. You're evolution. You're a superior being. Don't let her talk to you like that. She's just a puny human. Start acting like it," and kind of forces this out. This is almost horrific to the audience in a way, is the idea that someone is enabling the Deep. This might be the most heinous thing Sage has done yet, is try and give him a sense of power and a sense of oh no, you go and sure enough, we see him do that. We see they're at the rehearsal for the save, and he confronts Ashley, and when Ashley fires back a few little sarcastic one-liners, he gets in her face and says that he'll drown her in a toilet, and calls her a bitch and gets very threatening and aggressive. And it does make Ashley get scared, and she backs down and calls him sir. And she's quivering as she leaves the scene. And the funny thing is, I think up until this point, we've kind of enjoyed her unleashing at him because the Deep's an ass and he deserves it. So the idea that he's being empowered by Sage is kind of scary, but it does make me think, not only has she given Deep this advice to make him act out, she also says, yeah, you should be at the save with Ryan. That's a good idea. And sure enough, Deep is there at the save. He's at the rehearsal, and then again, he's at the actual thing. And all I could think was, okay, what are you playing at, Sage? It feels like you've got a game plan. You've got a chessboard in your mind of something you're trying to achieve, and I'm just not sure what it is. But to be honest, once I started having those thoughts that she is the smartest person on the planet, not smartest woman on the planet, smartest person on the planet, as she points out, it did get me thinking, given everything she knows about Homelander and the way that she figures he is, I do expect her to have an ulterior motive, and part of me even thought that she wants to take Homelander and the Seven down, or wants to take down Vought, or maybe she's even a good guy secretly, but she's just using her smarts to break them down from within. And the only thing that really gave me pause for that over the course of this episode, which I do think is a bit of an issue with that theory, is that she does say to some others later on to kill the boys, right? She says, Homelander wants them dead, kill them. and she leaves the room. Now, it is possible that she's just smart enough that she knows that they're not going to succeed. She knows they're going to fight back. She knows that they're going to... Because it's revealed that she was already aware that they were following her, right? And we'll get to all that TruthCon stuff in a bit. So it made sense that she figured that out. And it was like, yeah, of course she knew she was being followed because she's the smartest person on the planet. So that could be a legitimate reason where if she is actually secretly just trying to take down everyone from within, like all the bad guys, then maybe it is like just a case of she knew they would survive. She knew they wouldn't actually die. But at the same time, maybe she is just this agent of chaos who is just messing with everything for her own amusement. Like there's definitely possibilities and different things that could be at play here. But she does seem, obviously, like she does have some kind of agenda that she's trying to achieve, and she's playing the part. And part of me is expecting when we get to the season finale that, or maybe the conclusion to episode 7 before the finale, we're going to see what her plan actually is and how she's been manipulating the board the entire season to achieve it because she is super smart. I almost think that she can't survive this season because there's a problem with having a character who's meant to be this smart, who can manipulate and can strategize this much and can always see things coming, is that once you've gotten past the story that you wrote them for, they become kind of a hindrance as to why didn't she figure this out and that out. So I almost think there's going to be a way to write her out of the show by the end of the season, unless they've already got the entire plan for season 5 in mind and she's already part of that, because that's always what they were going to go to. But I can see pitfalls with having a character like this if you keep her past the original point she was meant to serve. Obviously, we're not at that point yet, far from it. We're episode 2 of the whole season. Clearly, there's a whole plan for what they're doing with her for the rest of the year. But it's interesting to me the potential writing problems you could encounter with that. But anyway, so regardless of anything I've said so far about her being right or wrong, it's got me thinking about it. It's got me thinking about what she's actually trying to achieve. And is she playing Homelander? Is she playing everyone at Vought? Like, does she actually want to give the Deepa pep talk? I don't think she should want to. And I guess that's the biggest thing that stuck out to me about this, is that it's not so much that she is causing influence. There is no way I can see the influence here of having the Deep be more involved in stuff and giving him like an ego boost. I don't see how that benefits anything that Homelander's asked her to do. And it doesn't seem like she's dumb enough to want to make him stronger or better. Like, she knows what type of an asshole he is, right? And it feels like she is very aware of who she's around at any given point. So even if she's willing to go with the super evil villain who wants to take over the world kind of thing that Homelander's effectively going for, I don't think she would want to put up with the Deepa's bullshit, which makes me think there's a motive. He's a pawn in some way. But is he just a pawn? Is this just a pawn that is inevitably going to help Homelander's cause? Maybe it is. Maybe she's just planting a seed that still benefits the goal that she's said that she's here to achieve with Homelander. Or is this her own goals that she's planting seeds for because she knows how things are going to go later down the line? Honestly, it could go any way at this point. We're only 2 episodes in. But anyway, back to Ryan and Homelander, though. Of course, we see the rehearsals. We see Homelander get self-conscious because he hears the guys who do all the pitches talk about how they blew their CG budget on on Dawn of the Seven de-wrinkling. They don't mention Homelander specifically, but it's definitely implied that some of them, if not all of them, needed to be de-wrinkled. And Homelander looks into the mirror all scared. But the main thing here is that Ryan's like, wait, are all saves like this? Are they all fake? And Homelander's like, no. There's real ones. I've saved a bunch of people. But this is how we make sure the first impression's good. And this we can beef up the support at times with this kind of thing. So, of course, we get the actual save. And instead of a guy in a pigtail ginger wig, it's an actual ginger girl who's like 12 or something. And the stuntman's got her as if he's a bad guy, and he's holding a gun at her head, and then he's pointing it at Ryan. Ryan comes swooping in, and he goes to grab him. And then he doesn't expect, as does no one who's there as part of Vought expect, Homelander's going to show up. And he does. And he makes a bit of a speech about, oh, their father and son, and he's important or whatever. I don't even remember what he said, but that was something along those lines. But Ryan hesitates, and Homelander's like giving him the eye, like, no, do it, push him, like they rehearsed. But of course, he pushes him too far, or too strongly, I should say, and the stuntman goes flying into a wall on a building and splats. Like, he splats against the concrete. It is amazingly darkly funny. I loved it. And my favorite part of this scene, and maybe the funniest thing about this whole episode, is the ginger girl that he was saving, quote unquote, from the stuntman. The look in her face in the immediate aftermath of this action, and then the eventual, like, you saved me. Like, the way she delivered that line actually was really funny. Like, give this almost borderline extra some credit, because the way she gave that line was hilarious to me, where she's still trying to fake that she's happy and delighted she's been saved by a superhero, but she's actually in shock, at borderline maybe scared to be standing next to him. I thought that was hilarious. That was great. And then Homelander wants to celebrate with some milkshakes to, I don't know, because he loves milk. It's this Homelander's thing. But this is the real, probably, linchpin emotionally for the episode, is that Homelander thinks Ryan's upset because his first save didn't go according to plan, and it wasn't, amazing. And he's like, oh, there'll be other saves, you'll make a better impression, it'll be fine. But when Ryan says, no, I'm upset because I killed the stuntman, right? I can't remember his name, but he's like, I'm upset I killed someone. And Homelander cannot compute this. He's like, wait, what? That's what you're upset about? It's a human. They die. It happens. And he just can't understand. And it gets to the point where Homelander gets annoyed and angry in a sort of dad way. It says, you're special, you're a chosen one, you're destined for great things, and you better start, realizing that, boy. And then walks back and picks up Ryan's milkshake that he got him, as if he's not allowed the treat because he's been bad, because he's not accepting the fact that he's great and destined for good things. That was also a little funny, but it also perfectly exemplified what this relationship is, where the mind of Homelander is, and hopefully it's the sort of thing where Ryan should be gradually realizing the type of maniac that his father actually is, and that those good teachings that his mother gave him are going to be important for him to cling to as time goes on. So yeah, I thought that stuff was good. The save scene itself was funny, for both for the actual death, and then the girl, just her reaction was gold to me. Elsewhere in the scene, I'll just quickly do the A-Train stuff, because again, it was kind of, like, I'm saving all the TruthCon stuff for last. But yeah, so the episode actually opens with him shooting a new movie, so we get our dickhead director character back, which is great. But they're doing, like, what's supposed to be his origin story, and they've got him dealing drugs for someone, like he's in The Wire or something like that. And then out of nowhere, Will Ferrell shows up as himself. Well, he's as himself when they yell cut. I mean, in the scene that we're watching at the start, he's technically the character that he's playing in the show, if that makes sense. But it's, they even reference it. He even says, I'm not coming across too blindsidey, right? So they even reference blindside, but it's this idea that this older white man's going to rescue this young black man from the ghetto. That's like the cheesy Hollywood insensitive movie they're making. And A-Train rightly points out that the scene's not that great, and it doesn't even make a whole lot of sense because he never did this. His role model was his brother, who worked as a waiter. He wasn't dealing drugs. And this is smart because it's reminding us of his brother, because the director says, oh, he must be proud of you. And A-Train's face doesn't look particularly happy at that statement, because we know he's not proud of him. We know what happened when he tried to help his brother last season. And we see his brother later on, so this is reminding us of that in a sort of natural way to set the tone for what A-Train's thinking about. So, but I mean, again, this was a sort of pretty amusing scene, especially the final little beat, which was the director correcting his line reading. He basically says, oh, you said this doesn't matter to me, but the line is this don't matter to me, and does like a sort of, I don't know, he's emphasized it with his hand. He's trying to speak kind of ghetto, I guess. Like, that's what he's going for. And again, it just, like, showing how insensitive the characters of Vought in this world is been a running sort of dark little gag since the start of the show. And it still works here. So there's a brief interaction with Black Noir, the second, of course, who basically asks, hey, was that killing those guys thing yesterday normal? Is that like a thing that Homelander gets us to do all the time? Because like, I'm trying to get into this role, but it's tough. And A-Train basically just tells him to get lost and says he's supposed to be quiet. That's his whole thing, so piss off. The only reason why I'm even talking about this little exchange, to be honest, is that it did make me remember something that I don't think I maybe said it when I was talking about it, but I didn't really emphasize it enough, maybe, is that A-Train notably didn't actually kill any of the guys, the three, like, Homelander fans last episode. He did block one of them from getting out, but it was actually Black Noir the second who came up and hit him in the back of the head. I'm not saying that makes A-Train super innocent, but I think the point is that he never actually crossed that line. The idea that he was maybe feeling he was forced to, and he would have done eventually. But I think from a point of view of the audience, like, he never actually was able to push himself over that line. He was kind of saved by someone else doing it instead. But I do think it gives a sort of clearer idea of like where the character is right now, is that he is feeling a little bit more remorse for some of the things. Obviously, he had that confrontation with Huey last season about what happened to Huey's girlfriend, and he actually did say sorry, and it felt like there was some meaning behind it, which was obviously different. And I think that combined with what we see with his family later on, where he's effectively told off for hanging out with his nephews. His brother does not like that he's hanging about with his kids and exposes him as a fake and says, no, that save you were just telling a story about, that wasn't real. It was stunt people. It was all this. And of course, this lines up nicely with everything we're seeing in the other plot with Ryan. So it's, just thematically, it links the two of them together really well. We see how fake the Ryan one is. So as soon as the brother comes in and says that was fake, we know exactly what he's talking about. We're seeing literally the same thing happen. In fact, hell, even the opening of this episode is the movie about A-Train's past is this fabrication that is complete bullshit. So in a way, all this stuff also thematically links with the TruthCon, because the TruthCon is about all these conspiracy theories and it's not real. But Vought have actually industrialized faking all these things and propagating them. They're just better at it than the nutjob conspiracy theorists who are at this convention, right? They're a class above, but they're still effectively doing the same thing, just for more direct profit and more direct, like whatever. So, right, all good. Everything's thematically linked. I love that in an episode. It makes it feel tight. It makes it feel like it's all belongs in the same episode together. And of course, Huey and Annie are actually watching this play out, and they can't hear what they're saying, but they want to confront A-Train about what happened and the fact that there's these two random men who both happen to be black, I did notice, are being blamed for beating up and killing the three guys that Homelander had killed last episode. And they're trying to like figure this out and solve it or whatever. But when the brother leaves and A-Train's left there on his own, Annie's getting ready to storm over and confront him, but Huey grabs her by the arm and says, no, give him a minute. And first of all, this is notable because he's showing sympathy for the man who ran through his girlfriend. So again, we've come a long way since episode 1. But notably, this is Huey again showing sympathy for a family crisis and being Huey, right? It's almost like the only time he's not Huey is when he's with his mother, because then it's his own shit that he can't get over, which makes sense. Everyone's kind of like that in a way. It's easy to be cooler and collected when you're on the outside of the problem rather than being the one who's actually emotionally affected by it. That's obviously just a very natural, normal thing, but worth mentioning. But when they get back to the office, A-Train's there. He's like, hey, it took you a long time to get here. He knew they were watching. And when he's asked why he came here and gave them this evidence, which is going to exonerate the two men that have been accused of killing the three guys, which is camera footage of them at the time of the murder, he basically says it's a thank you because you could have got in my face in front of my family and you didn't. And Annie says, well, thank Huey because I was ready to do it and I would have chewed you out, I would have beat you up, whatever. And A-Train agrees that he deserves it. And it's a very somber kind of moment. I think what I really liked about this, though, is this idea that in the moment, I think there's just a little second before the next line of dialogue where A-Train says, you could have done this in front of my family and you didn't, so consider this a thank you. There's a little moment where Annie kind of looks over at Huey, and just like Huey has been this like guide for Butcher, this idea that he can maybe balance him a little bit, I think Annie has that little moment there where she realizes that A-Train's handed this over and given them this evidence, which we see later in the episode does get these two guys out of jail. And even this moment with A-Train even convinces Annie that she probably should become more of the spokesperson that her following want her to be. She's not quite put the outfit on yet, but she does light up the eyes and she floats a little bit in front of the crowd. And she realizes that if A-Train can do something good and step up, then she can too. So it almost provokes her into it. But I do like, again, this idea, though, that Huey being just good was rewarded. The A-Train came to them and offered this because Huey made this decision. Now, A-Train didn't know it was Huey's decision, of course, but Annie did. And it's the sort of thing where we talk a lot about Huey being this positive influence in those around him. And, you know, even with Annie in this case, he's been that positive influence. And that's, you know, that stuff's really nice. So I guess we're ready for TruthCon. Obviously, there's a little bit of setup with some of the characters, you know, Kimiko being in therapy. She has a hard time this episode. She doesn't want to talk about her past. She has these little flashbacks to it. And it's actually a poster at the TruthCon. And, you know, the TruthCon, just if I've not made this clear, it's all these conspiracy theories. There's flat earthers, there's all this sort of stuff. But there's a lot of things that are specific to the show's universe, which is like super conspiracies and things like that. The main thing that Firecracker, who was the sort of YouTuber woman that we were introduced last episode, so we see a lot more of her this episode, and she's there with a panel. She's going to speak. Her whole thing is about accusing Starlight and certain celebrities. Tom Hanks was the one that I remember being mentioned, of being pedophiles. And that's her thing. And it's a bunch of conspiracy nonsense where she says if you add up all of the movies that Tom Hanks has been in, which, you know, isn't going to stay the same. That's the first thing I'd say to debunk that. That's a completely random thing to take. But she says, oh, that happens to be the code for certain crimes with the police. So it's just math. And she says it with this shit-eating grin. She's doing kind of the southern voice. Like, she's got the whole act down pat. But it's entertaining to watch because the actresses did a great job of just being this shithead and being this kind of con artist effectively. But we see that. We also get introduced to Splinter, who's this guy that's kind of working for her at the convention at least, and he can duplicate into multiple versions of himself. That's going to come up in a big way in a little bit. Kimiko, she sees this poster anyway about this conspiracy about kids being trafficked, and it kind of triggers her because she was kind of like a victim of that, like the real version of it. And she ends up downing a bunch of booze, ends up messing with Frenchie a little bit. When Frenchie's getting a text from his boyfriend, she grabs the phone and sends back a message asking for cock. You know, it's all very amusing. It's kind of adorable in a weird way. She thinks she's holding Frenchie back, but Frenchie's trying to make it clear that he's not holding back because of her. And we actually sort of get more context for that later on. I'll just mention it here. He calls the woman whose name I cannot remember, but she was in like season 1. I'll just say Frenchie's friend. And this is someone he has a history with. By that I mean the boyfriend. The boyfriend doesn't know who he is, but he's responsible for the boyfriend's family being killed because his dad was a judge. And so now he's sleeping with someone who eventually is going to have to find out that Frenchie is responsible for the death of his family. We're barreling down the road towards that. It's interesting because I feel like if it had just been he felt awkward because of Kimiko, that would have been such a simple and too conventional plot that I'm glad that you know, this kind of just confirms that it's not that. That you know, it's almost kind of sweet in a weird way that Kimiko thought it was, but it wasn't. Like it never felt like it really was the reason. So I appreciate that at least a little bit. Anyway, they're at the TruthCon and they see some of this speech from her. But Sage is around, right? And Sage whispers in Splinter's ear. And obviously this is all to later lure the characters to this specific room later on so they can ambush them. But she sends Splinter off and he intentionally leaves his phone out with a note saying, or a text message saying, hey, this ballroom, 9 p.m, blah, blah, blah. And it's fine. But when Frenchie or Kimiko are there and they find this information, they hear some noises from behind the door. Now, when we introduced Splinter and he was setting up the stage for Firecracker, is that her name? I feel like I'm worried that I've just made up a different name. Yeah, it's Firecracker. Okay, I just had like a weird moment where it didn't sound right in my head. Uh, but when he was setting up the stage for Firecracker, it's very clear that he's got a massive crush on her, right? And he says she's a personal friend. There's an awkward moment where he goes to hug her when she comes on stage, and she just kind of walks through it. There's a moment where she asks if she looks all right, and he just stands there staring, being like, "You're perfect." Which actually is what leads to the line. We have to get a move on. The flat earthers have got this place at 4:30. That was a funny line because it was so understated. It was just it set up beautifully what this convention is. And we see like a bunch of people walking around with their climate change as a hoax shirts and all that other bullshit. Although that did also lead to a funny little line where Kimiko's asking Frenchie if people actually believe all this shit. And he's like, "Oh, people will believe anything, like, even something as silly as the moon landing." And then the way Kimiko looks over at him after he signs that with his hands is really funny. The idea that he's above conspiracy theories, but he's convinced the moon landing's silly. And she just sort of gives him this glance. And she's already drunk at this point as well, so she's kind of overdoing it a little bit with the performance. In a good way. Like, it was really charming to watch her be kind of tipsy and sort of go through all these beats. But yeah, so anyway, what do they see? We see the human centipede masturbation scene. And what do I mean by that, you might ask, right? If for some reason you're listening to me talk about this and you haven't watched the episode, I don't know why you'd just be listening to me and not watching the episode. But he's masturbating whilst looking at a photo of Firecracker, okay? And that's the first thing it shows you. The door cracks open and you see him just kind of hunched over. He's looking at this photograph and he's whacking away in the sauna. Fine. Gross. Lack of self-control that he had to go and just do that in the middle of the day when he's supposed to be doing other things, but whatever, right? He's not really harming anyone. But then the door opens wider and he has like 6 or 7 clones that he's made of himself, because that's his superpower, of course, and they're all eating each other's ass, right? And that's the visual we get. It is wild. Frenchie's reaction is exactly perfect. And then, of course, Splinter, when he hears them, turns and looks over. In fact, all of them do. All like 7 of them look over at them. And he says, and I quote, "It isn't what it looks like." What? Do you know what? Maybe this is the funniest line. Maybe I was given the ginger kid with the "thank you for saving me." But this is a very funny episode, I guess, is what I'm saying. It's a very funny. There's a lot of funny lines. But this one also broke me because I'm just like, what on earth else could it possibly be or look like? What do you think this would otherwise look like? I don't. Look, the only other thing this could be is that you're actually a human centipede. In which case, I mean, that's this whole bag of worms on its own, or can of worms on its own. I don't know what to say to that. I just don't know. He flabbergasted me with that line. I thought it was hilarious. And then it was really gross as well, because right at the end of the scene, one of them, who was in one of the other one's ass cracks, like sort of pulls a hair from his mouth or whatever. Like he sort of is okay, right. So it's a whole thing. Of course, the one disappointment I had here was that didn't see this, because MM's reaction to Love Sausage back in the previous seasons was very funny. And I feel that this would be perfect for him. But the episode kind of almost knew that I would be disappointed that didn't see that, because he sees them splitting up into other people later. And because when he splits up, the clothes don't duplicate, he ends up just a bunch of naked versions of himself. And does see that, and he has a very similar reaction to Love Sausage, where he just says, "Oh, F no," or whatever he says. So I did enjoy that in the later scene. But yeah, of course, before we get to the ambush scene, Butcher and have a fight. Also, I may have made this observation in a past review somewhere in the last 3 seasons, but the fact that stands for mother's milk, and Homelander's got this whole fetish with mother's milk, like the actual thing, not him. I do wonder if there's going to be some kind of ironic thing at the very end of the show where MM's like, I don't know, got to be instrumental, or maybe crack a one-liner or something. Like someone will make a joke about the fact that his name is Mother's Milk and that Homelander's like a perv for it. I don't know. Like, I see potential. Okay, I see potential. Anyway, so yeah, Butcher, who's already been kicked out, because Butcher actually, his start of the episode is that he confessed that he's dying to everyone else, and kicks him out and says that he's a liability. They're all sorry for him, of course, but he's a liability. And Butcher just shows up at the convention, which MM's pissed at, but he's like, okay, I'm going to keep my eye on you, right? Whatever. But when Butcher starts saying, why are we not just running up and grabbing Sage because she's not got any physical powers, it's all just brains, why don't we just do that? Takes him outside and tells him to get lost. Butcher provokes a fight out of him, and like knows what he's doing. He's like, the only way you feel bad is if it gets beaten into you, so it's not happening. And it's not until Butcher actually mentions his wife that, of course, it actually becomes a real thing, right? Because of course it does. Like, you knew he was going to mention his family, and that was going to be the thing that makes him actually lose it. So he punches Butcher a few times, and you know that's kind of it. Of course, the irony here being that Butcher is going to be the one that ends up saving them, right? Because they get ambushed, they get lured to this room thinking they're going to spy on a meeting, but it was actually a trap to get them there. And Sage tells Firecracker and the others to kill them. Homelander will appreciate that. Sage had a one-on-one with Firecracker earlier where she calls out Firecracker's bullshit and asks, what is this, what he's selling? And Firecracker doesn't want to talk to her, she's casually racist, bunch of other things. But ultimately, when she realizes that Sage does work with Homelander, and Sage had a selfie to prove it, she's like, I sell a purpose, right? They feel like they've got a purpose, that they're in some sort of war against a secret evil. I just rile them up and they pay me. And we see that. We see an example of a guy paying for a photo with her. So she's making bank. That's what all this is about. It's just about making money. It's not that she actually believes this shit that she's saying. She's just a grifter. So Firecracker's like, yeah, sure. You want me to kill them? And it's like, yeah, this is your final edition. Like, and she's like, what for? It's like, well, the sooner you've killed them, the sooner you'll find out. And obviously, I don't think Homelander's aware that she even exists. I don't think Sage is intending on giving her anything necessarily, or maybe she's going to string her along a bit longer. I don't know. But we get the fight. Firecracker, well, I said she didn't believe anything. She is still just casually racist multiple times, because she says to Kimiko, I'm going to send her back to China, to which chimes in, she's from Japan. And then the fight kind of breaks out from there. I like that because I always appreciate in ensemble shows where you've got certain pairs of characters who are more associated with each other because they have their friendship. So Frenchie and Kimiko have always been kind of a pair, right? Because he's the one that sort of reached out to her and felt bad for her, and they kind of bonded, right? Has a lot of confrontation with Butcher. Huey and Butcher have a lot of back and forth together as a pair. And whenever you get like two characters who are not typically teamed up having like either a sweet moment or a moment where they stick. It was kind of like back in like season 2, I want to say. There was the episode where went out on the road with Starlight and Huey to investigate stuff, and it was actually really nice because it was the first time we ever had and Starlight kind of bond or get to know each other. Now this is not quite like this, and it's a much smaller thing, but just the idea that I think it would have been very, very easy to write this scene where Frenchie jumps in and says she's from Japan or she's Japanese. Obviously Kimiko doesn't speak out loud, right? She's going to a therapist potentially to maybe try and unlock her speech, since it's more psychological than anything else. But it would make sense that Frenchie, being the one that's close to her, to jump in and get defensive and say, no, she's from Japan, and jump in and say it instead of letting Kimiko sign it, because the sign language would be lost on Firecracker, right? So that's why someone probably should jump in and say it for her. But the fact that it's that jumps in and says it is actually kind of neat. It just kind of shows he cares about his team, he cares about her, and it's not a pairing that I think of that often. So it's just kind of nice when they show here there is a bit of camaraderie, even amongst the links and the pairs that you don't associate immediately with each other, because they're usually tied to other characters in the team. So I like that. Anyway, they end up fighting through the door, which ends up being in a girl's bat mitzvah, and I believe it's bat mitzvah and not bar mitzvah because it's a girl. Or maybe it's the other way around. I really don't know. I'll be honest. I actually Googled this because I didn't want to sound stupid, because I genuinely didn't think that girls had these. But when I Googled it, it turns out they do. They just have a slightly different title. But they do have them. Because I was like, this looks like a bat mitzvah, or a bar mitzvah, but I didn't think girls had those. That's just me not knowing that much about this stuff. That's all that is. But obviously it's the boys, so it's got a quirky kind of theme. It's themed after the Marvelous Miss Maisel, but it says the Marvelous Miss Rachel instead, which is obviously the girl's name. But they've got like cutouts of the actors from the show. Obviously, the fact that that's also an Amazon show, I think, is probably part of the meta joke here, and why they had the legal rights to just use them. But it's still funny to me, especially since Firecracker uses the standout of Tony Shalhoub to like make up. She's like, oh, this proves it was like an inner circle in Hollywood, and then like flashes the camera over to the cardboard cutout as if that proves anything. That also got a good little chuckle out of me. But they end up fighting amongst this party, and the great thing about it is that all the naked copies of Splinter run in, and it's the girl who's up in the chair as they're all like singing for her, who notices them first and just sees nothing but cock, and just starts screaming. The poor girl's traumatized, possibly for life. But yeah, we get this fight breaking out, and ultimately Kimiko gets shot in the head, and they're losing. Like the bad guys are going to potentially win here. You know, like I said, Firecracker starts recording a video on her phone, but that's when our good old boy Billy Butcher jumps in with a crowbar and hits her first, and then rails up the duplicates of Splinter and starts hitting and stabbing them with a crowbar. And they end up all jumping on Butcher, and Butcher actually yells out, "Get the boys out of here." He basically wants MM to just take Frenchie and Kimiko and just run. But of course MM's not going to do that, and they all just sort of stick around and start fighting all the duplicates. Eventually one of the Splinters gets stabbed through the head with a crowbar, and when one of the other Splinters sees it, he goes, "No, not Prime." The idea being that that's the main one, that's the original one that's got the power, so all the rest of them are all effectively drones who are all going to just drop dead within a few seconds. Of course, not before one of our final really funny lines of the episode, which is where one of the duplicates who's reacting to this looks over at Firecracker and tells her that they've been in love with her ever since her first Holocaust hoax. That's the word I'm looking for. Her first Holocaust hoax video. Why can't I say... Not that it's a phrase that I really want to be saying anyway, admittedly, but like... saying it for too many weird... I don't know. I had trouble putting those two words together in my mouth. Regardless... probably a good thing now I'm thinking about it, but regardless, she just runs away, so she's not done with. And given that she's on some of the posters for the season, I expect she is going to be sticking around as a prominent enough character. But I thought this was all entertaining. It gave Butcher kind of a hero moment, maybe showed that he was still useful in some way. That said, though, the end of the episode doesn't do that. It doesn't have MM say you're on the team and like, we clearly need you. He thanks Butcher for saving their ass, and then Butcher grills him and says, "You should have, like, left me. I'm going to die anyway. That was a stupid choice. You also took the boys into a trap. Like, you're going to get someone killed. You're not making tough decisions like you're supposed to be." But then it kind of turns, and Butcher says that he's made a lot of mistakes, and he's not really got enough time to fix them all. He's not got enough time left to right all the wrongs that he's done. He's admitting his wrongdoing, and he says to MM, "If I can do one good thing, but with whatever time I've got left, I want to get Ryan away from Homelander. I want to save him." Which is, I think it's a big deal. I think it's a big deal that he's not saying he wants to kill Homelander. He sees saving Ryan as the priority over killing Homelander. Now, admittedly, those two things are likely going to go hand in hand. But I do think that even for a little while, if that's how he's thinking, it shows a hell of an improvement in the way he thinks. And how healthy he's thinking. He's got a more noble goal. It's not just about revenge, it's about saving someone who needs saved. And it's the sort of thing where, his motivation back at the start of the show was that he believed Homelander had raped and killed his wife. Part of that obviously seeming to be true in the long run, but part of it wasn't. The murder part was not true. Now that she's actually dead, right? Obviously he's seeing a version of her in his head. But the reason why the version in his head is accurate is because he knows that all she would want is that for Ryan to be safe. She's not wanting revenge against Homelander. She just wants her boy to not be the next Homelander. And the idea that his motivation now actually aligns with what his dead wife would want feels like a more real, not, it's more noble, of course, and it's more heroic, if you want to call it that. But if nothing else, it actually lines up with the real person and what they would want, versus just a blind revenge out of anger that, well, is justifiable and makes sense given what he thought had happened to her. Like, you understand why he feels that way. No one's ever going to argue it. But he has to, he wants revenge because it's the obvious thing to want given the circumstances. But now he has more context. He knows more about who his wife is in this scenario and about what she wanted by the time she did die. She had dying words, a dying wish even. And he now has that as his number one priority over, and that was a problem last season, is he didn't quite commit to that. He was more concerned about killing Homelander than looking after Ryan, which is kind of why we're in the pickle that we're in now with him. Not the only reason, of course, but one of the many reasons. So I thought that's really good character advancement for Butcher, and I think what makes this final scene really good is that clearly understands what he's saying to him, but says it's too little and it's too late. And the episode ends with Butcher walking out of the office in a really kind of melancholic kind of way. Like, he's just effectively done the right thing. As much as Butcher can do, he's just tried to like appeal to him for what his actual goal is and effectively admit that he's been in the wrong before. Like, this is the most honest he's ever been. But much like we can understand why Butcher was so blinded by revenge in past episodes and seasons, we can all also understand why feels the way he does now, and he's not ready to just back Butcher again, because Butcher has screwed him over and taken him for granted too much. So it was a really good ending to the episode. Like, all this central stuff was great. Obviously, there was other good stuff in the episode with A-Train, with Ryan and Homelander. Even the Deep and Ashley was kind of interesting. All the Sage stuff that's building is good. But it was this core idea of the Truth Con and where and Butcher end up by the end of the episode. It's really good. Kimiko looks like she might go back to the therapy briefly, but then kind of seemingly changes her mind. I might have misread what this little moment was doing. I think at first I thought she was recognizing someone from her past on the computer, on like the news story she was looking at. But when I looked at it again, it looked more like it was the two new scapegoats that they were blaming the murders on for the Starlight stuff. So I don't know if I was just making a correlation there, because it kind of did this quick little flashback to like one of the men that was there when she was being forced to fight as a child. And I made a connection there, but I'm not so sure that was what it was actually trying to tell me. But clearly, regardless, I'm sure that'll clear up as we see where her plot goes in the season. But she definitely is being haunted more by her past. She's thinking about it more. And it makes sense that if we're getting towards the end of her story next season, then we're really starting to dive into her trauma. And I guess that's the one thing that I'll say about the Huey plot, is that diving into his mother leaving, which is something that was, I'm sure, mentioned back in season 1, but hasn't really been focused on since. We knew it was just him and his dad for most of his life. But between looking into Kimiko's time as a child and being like imprisoned and forced to do what she did, Huey's relationship with his mother and like what that did to him as a kid, like there's a lot of like, we're going back to the key parts of like their backstories and like maybe dealing with their even A-Train, I suppose, in a lot of ways. Like, we're really dealing with the core things that have given them a negative element, or given them something to grow on from when they're older. It's like some sort of key trauma or bad past that they have to contend with. Like, there's a lot of that going across a lot of the characters right now. Some of them have moved on a little bit from that. I guess that's maybe the one thing I'll say about Frenchie's whole thing, is that while it is from his past, it doesn't feel it's not quite the same as the childhood trauma, I guess, is what I'll say. If I recall correctly, I want to say that this story about killing the judge's family is what made what did change him. I remember the story coming up, but the details are definitely fuzzy on it. So if this was if people can remember exactly what the turning point was in his character's backstory with that particular incident, please do let me know in the comments, because it's a bit vague in my memory right now. But anyway, that's my thoughts on episode 2. I went into this episode thinking, oh, this will be shorter than the first review. It'll 30 minutes. And I'm looking at the clock, and I went way over that. I was hoping this would be live in the next 5 minutes, but instead it's probably going to be another half hour by the time it uploads and exports and everything else. So thank you very much for joining me. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. You can get some bonuses, you can help keep the lights on, all these things do help. I wouldn't be able to keep doing this if it wasn't for the support on Patreon or things like YouTube memberships, if that's more your thing. But thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?